found language from historical texts, including rural women's magazines in the 1910s and 1920s, and booster documents extolling the virtues of farming the Great Plains. Comfort interrogates the pathology of colonization for those helpmeets brought to the unsettling task of settling. And part of what brought Sarah and I together are these remarkable synergies between our two books, as well as divergences. So you'll certainly hear more as Sarah shares some of her pristine and remarkable poetry. So Sarah, please share some from your book, Comfort.
Thank you so much, Margot. And before I do that, I wanted to introduce you and your book. I'm so thrilled to be here with Margot Douaihy, who earned her PhD in creative writing from Lancaster University. She is the author of the forthcoming crime novel, Scorched Grace, the inaugural crime fiction title for Gillian Flynn Books. She authored the poetry collections Scranton Lace, Girls Like You, and Bandit Queen, the Runaway Story of Belle Starr, which is what we're here to talk about today. She is a founding member of the Creative Writing Studies Organization and an active member of Sisters in Crime and the Radius of Arab American Writers. So Bandit Queen, the Runaway Story of Belle Starr, is a polyphonic docu-poetic project exploring Belle Starr, a notorious Wild West outlaw, and her unsolved murder in 1889. Belle Starr traded a privileged upbringing for a life on the lam, marrying outlaws, thieving, and providing shelter for criminal gangs, all with her signature brocade and purple hats. After the media locked into her story, Belle Starr rocketed to fame. She, quote, became a compelling anti-hero and criminal mastermind. Newspapers and books fabricated details about Belle, and a mass delusion seemingly took hold. But who was Belle Starr? Where do fiction and fact overlap? This archive-driven collection examines identity, desire, rule-breaking, and authenticity. So yes, there's so much overlap. I'm so excited to dive into this with you. And I'm going to start reading from my book, Comfort, a little bit, and then Margot's going to read from Bandit Queen, and then we're going to have a discussion. So this is Comfort with all my Post-its, the advanced reader copy. So I'm going to read from the first section. It has 3 sections, sun up, day, and dusk. And I'm going to read from the first section called Sun Up. Like a call collect, sun enters, assuming permission, asking forgiveness later. Revivified dirt with water, revivified plains with ocean. Slip me one, I was a slip once. A cinch purse of green sea glass, tiny Bible, splinter of wood from Boston, grain of Atlantic sand. Is a tight little island, a prairie zephyr, a hoax, an average Western type. Is a pile of rope, pig iron, coke, softwood, hardwood, bran, and jam-stained fingers right in the time spot, ticks in the fur. Is apple peel auguries, weevils in flower, 24 prunes with senna leaves, 1 pint of boiling water, a plug of wood covered in flannel and double fleshed by corrosion. Is in morning black and gingham, buckwheat, green gage, mackerel and kits and layers of raisins. Is drums of figs instead of hard, ungainly knobs, does not project too far beyond the general outline, affords a concealed recess for the fingers, the latter greater than it appears, and still more so in Nebraska. Is a hook, a hood, a helpmeet, a platform, a cedar, an arrow through topsoil saying, come. Is flax into bales, into rope, into twine, sacks, paper from straw, glass, starch from maize, wheat, etc. Canned fruits, potted meats, vegetables, blankets, woolens, carpets, cheap carpets, leathers, and skins. How so many flourish in a place so young is quite a mystery to me. A can of lye dissolved in a gallon of rainwater, 10 cents worth of salt, and all scraps dried, all scraps rolled up fine and streaked, a cup full of spirits to each pail, each revenant caravan. A cloud of smoke that somehow braided hair in a frame, seeds for the eyes, a single continuous effort. Is white squares tatted, mended, starched, quarry for swimming, colony of two. From sod to hardwood, if you're lucky. Salamander bricks in a stack by the tractors. Vision is white lines that come from the eyes themselves, projections across the plain. Household notes. Sulfur and molasses to purify blood, for cough, a poultice of bread and milk, or bacon rind and manure in a little bag hung about the neck, or kerosene-soaked red flannel over the throat, or onions. In case of summer complaint, boil blackberries for children. To cure bilious headache, drink juice, drink charcoal. A teaspoon of ammonia added once a week will make the house grow. I think that one cannot take a farm haphazard in the bottom, as he might do in some of the tablelands. I think it will not be without interest. I think it will not be difficult for a stranger to travel alone, and I think of the woman said to be a seer, her grave cordoned off on its own the far side of the cemetery, a chain around her collecting coins and candle stubs from the locally curious. And I think about the baby, little stranger, on its way to getting baptized, thrown from the buggy and buried alone by the tree line, apart from the other saved souls, because it never got wet. This map may be taken as accurate as far as it goes, and whoever intends to make a new home in this new country will find it of very great value. I forget what a new friend feels like, our place on the small hill. When women first came here, it might be months before they heard another woman's voice. But sunup is respiteless, constant. Is boiling lamps and water to make them stronger, is slipping her pancake turner under the pie and seldom burning her fingers, is filling her mouth with sassafras, very hot water for bruises. And when the water is blood warm, put it in a quart glass jar with sugar and salt. Wait in a warm place until evening for what is home without a father. And the ocean shrank away from the plains, and timetables caramelized into layers, and ships sailed passengerless, and flags were torn to shreds, and the old ways died, and a trance was woven between all folk, and they grew thinner and more alert, and how I want to dance, but find my legs have been broken painlessly in the night. Thank you.
Applause from me and all of our attendees and anyone who's watching this in the future. So you're time traveling from these days of comfort into the future, Sarah. Just really beautiful verse that is so resonant. It has these subconscious echoes as well as this tactility of the everyday. Stunning, really stunning. And we'll be sharing more about our overlap with the archives, with the intent to excavate and explore. And just to root my reading and a little bit more about Belle Starr, as Sarah read in the intro, I was introduced to this person really late in life, just a few years ago, about 5 or 6 years ago, when I walked into the Pioneer Women Museum in Ponca City, Oklahoma. And there was this exhibit of Wild West women. And you had Calamity Jane, Bonnie and Clyde, Bonnie of Bonnie and Clyde, and Belle Starr. And I was just gripped and taken with her story. I had not heard of her, but of course, in that region, she has this anti-hero/hero status. Many legends are told down from generation to generation, and she just has this really iconic hold. And the storytelling is really interesting because you'll see that it will diverge and have some interesting overlap, almost kaleidoscopic, where you're hearing some refrains and some of the details will change. One of the details about Belle that is vetted and really agreed upon, because a lot is up for debate, is that she was a remarkable writer. So she would compete in competitions, and she was truly devoted to one horse in particular named Venus. And there's even one of the few pictures that remains of Belle includes this picture, because of course photography was developed just at the end of her life. And the side saddle riding that she did brought her great acclaim. So she's quite literally riding this horse in a full brocade gown, side saddle, and still racing around barrels, and was incredibly quick and known for just her dexterity and her feats of great speed. So all of that inspired this poem called Side Saddle. Ladies, face the side. Protect your gowns, your fineries, ladylike. Ride, ladies, hide yourselves. Side saddle means nothing to straddle, nothing between your legs except ropey heat, slick muscle, back straight as granite, calves strong enough to choke a man. Indeed, to choke a man. Had to peel one off me, his tongue green as poison. Expect money would buy an easy life, but servitude ain't easy, is it? Grooming a buckskin, too handsome, had to steal him. Amaranth smoke, horse shit, redolent as old biscuits. Judge Parker, I meant no harm, wrong place, true unstory, wrong time. Side saddle is a contortion, an idea, an inherited practice, racing, trading one name for another. Think of your grandmother, your dear mother, who couldn't ride, hold the reins, stride aside, such horsemanship. Leaving home behind, face the side, leaning into the swerve, each nerve on fire. Protect your gown, ladies, line your lips, hip heel, face forward, thrash your knees, kneading leather like an axe in your thorax, that twist in the middle, side riding, every inch fighting, lane of mane, faster, harder, damn it hurts, but better than a slow death, the corpse breath of sitting still. Smoke and leather. Two pleasures respectable women ain't supposed to enjoy. Tobacco and straps, holster oiled, lips supple as raw meat. You're out of your mind, Sam said. You're totally mindless. The saddle fits, riding faster than spitting out. I'm pregnant. Sweat and horsehair, my velvet pocked by cinder. Holding reins too tight will slow a lady down, so let go. Go. No feeling more alive than nearly dying. Wood smoke thick as a rope around your neck. So two poems from Bandit Queen, the runaway story of Belle Starr.
Thank you, Margot.
Thanks.
I wish that everybody could see the entire interior of the book, but I'm going to try to describe it verbally as I go into my first question for you. I feel like I don't think I've ever read a book of poems that has such an array of forms as this book. There's just such an incredible range on the page. There's really almost no two poems that are alike, I want to say, even though there's some themes that come back, but you have prose blocks, you have lineated poems with all lengths of line that look wildly different on every page. You incorporate quotations and epigraphs. You play with typography. You do some visual poetry stuff where you're sculpting words into shapes, using text upside down on the page, using little doodads, I don't even know what to call them, but little typographical symbols to do interesting things to break up the poems. incorporating historical typographies. And of course, there's also the illustrations by Bree Hermanson that are in there as well, which I don't know if you want to show.
Oh yes, yeah. Here's Bree's remarkable scratchboard, which in some ways, pays homage to the original kind of engravings that were the primary method of reproduction before photography was invented. But Bree, being from Oklahoma, just had a really sincere, rich connection to these figures, and that is, the illustrations are a crucial, vital part of the storytelling and the visual experience. Here's one of those where we sort of lay it out and mimic and inhabit those type styles of the original texts. And I have a few of those books here. This one is, one of these original.
Oh, love that.
Yeah, I mean, really, there's just so much to unpack about how I came into that range diversity. But here you can see there is some of that aesthetic variation, the variegated ways of thinking about even what headlines are. This, of course, was published in the 30s, but to address that, the idea of documentary poetry seized me for exploring who this woman really was. I mean, I thought of it almost as a true crime poetry project, because her murder is still unsolved. There are various theories as to who killed her and brutally murdered her a few days shy of her 41st birthday. And really what it morphed into was this kind of documentary poetry exploration, and the range in the forms felt like they were united more by their pulse and frequency rather than a kind of stylistic continuity, because I came at it with the archives being tiny little scraps of paper, long, big books like this. The actual archives themselves are this assemblage, and sometimes they're this overwritten, erased, ripped apart. Even the digital archives that were sent to us by the librarians that I worked with, the Western history libraries at the University of Oklahoma in Norman, Oklahoma. So less patterning, more about those elective affinities from the kind of the pulse of each point of archive, just allowed an either poetic experience and something that I wanted to filter through the bizarre form, the unconventional form, or perhaps even more of a conventional form. Because there are there's a poem Baroque, a few poems that are just a kind of poem that are this types of works that I read growing up by Robert Creeley and Sylvia Plath, etc. But I wanted to get to the heart of that almost kaleidoscopic exploration of who this real woman was by just grabbing these constellations and seeing how I can kind of keep a feral sort of wildness about them without hammering them into a particular form just because, of artifice. So really, it was about kind of cutting back almost through this forest of discovery and trying to inhabit the synthesis as I was doing the research. And your book has just this glorious kind of crystalline meditative quality to it that allows for when you're in a space and you can hear every kind of texture of an echo. And I just found that to be so deeply rewarding as I was reading. So how did you come to the form of comfort?
Yeah, I love that you mentioned, you said feral and wildness. Those are kind of two watchwords for me with this book. And I'm also interested in how you said there's this kaleidoscopic history around Belle Starr, who is a singular figure, although there's this suggestion that she contains multitudes because there's so much that we don't know, and there's so much that people said about her that's really hard to verify. But yet your book centers around this single legendary figure of this woman. And by contrast, comfort sort of creates a tapestry of anonymous women who were the women who were brought to settle the Great Plains along with their husbands, and to enter these roles of domesticity and agriculture. And so in thinking about how to create a texture for the book, it sort of modulates between, I can show, so like here's a typical page. Oops, the book is disappearing. Okay. Let's see. Never mind. Okay, let's not do that. There's about half the poems are these very dense prose blocks that just have a super condensed, thick, heavy feel to them. And then the other half of the book, mixed in with those prose blocks, are very spacious, lineated poems. So there's a lot of white space on the page and lines that range across the page. So not everything, is left justified in that kind of traditional form. So what I was going for was kind of this modulation between the density of these poems that end up being like accruals or lists, which is where most of the found language enters the book, and then the lineated poems, which are in more of a singular voice, but still don't really have a speaker that could be said to be a single person. And the found language, which is mostly from Comfort magazine, which I think we're going to talk about later, but the found language is coming from these sort of ladies' home journal like magazines that have a lot of advertisements, household tips, which you heard in one of my poems, that mostly end up being lists of materials in a way, which is something I also heard a lot or read in your book a great deal of, just like the physical material of this place, whether it's like leather, smoke, velvet, horse shit, all of these very evocative sensual things. And so something about the density of that, an overwhelm associated with the amount of work that was needed to live this really hard life on the prairie. And then the spaciousness, which is really like the quote emptiness of the prairie, and the loneliness of being a settler in a place that where there weren't very many white people at this time of colonizing the plains. And overall, what I wanted the book to do somehow over the course of the 3 sections was to move from this sense of like control and domestic sort of like regimentation to a wildness and a surrender and a going off and a running away, which is really interesting as an overlap with Bandit Queen too, because you describe your book as a runaway story. So
actually,
yeah, I wonder.
One
go ahead.
follow-up on that. It's just so insightful as you're talking. I'm seeing and hearing your poems in a different way. It just enhances my understanding of how they kind of land within me. Is that what you were talking about when you were describing the pathology of colonization, in terms of that, both the isolation and the kind of, the ways of the almost violence internally? Is that what you meant?
Yeah, and I think this is a good segue into our next topic. Just that act of this manifest destiny of like, we're going to strike out into this land that supposedly is ours for the taking, and the story of the very harsh life that people endured, and almost this martyrdom of like, valorizing these settlers for building something out of quote nothing, and how genuinely hard it was to create a farm on a place that wasn't really meant to be used in that way, that white people from back east were wanting to use it. I mean, they had to plant trees to keep the wind from, they had to plant trees to create a habitable space, for instance, and they had to come to rely on themselves and on other people in very serious ways that that were just unprecedented. And as part of, my process for bringing the book to completion here, I sort of reckoned a little bit more with the legacy of this settler colonialism that that this book is really grounded in. And I know that you, in Bandit Queen, I was struck by the beginning of the book. I mean, the first thing you see after your epigraphs is a historical map of Indian Territory, what was called Indian Territory in Oklahoma, which is where various tribes from all over the country were sort of shunted in exile. Yeah, and so I wonder what you want to say about what that, dropping us right away into that, and how you think about the concept of this land where Belle Starr's story takes place.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to bring up. We can't, even these terms Wild West, are just really, it's important to contextualize that. And so I tried to really do that and offer that kind of richer context with using that archival map that shows, that there's of course a prehistory, history that is something that we must, recognize. And also Belle being a person, who lived and died in this place, we all, wherever we go, we leave some kind of archive, and we're part of a continuum. We're not, who's going to come after us? And so art in a way is a vehicle for inquiry in that regard. Where do we fit within the lineage? Where do we fit within the continuum? And how do we kind of pull back the layers of the, palimpsest and ask, what is being overwritten, what is being erased, what is being degraded, what is being brought to the fore and highlighted. So I was interested in, land as both something that Belle was part of, a crew, basically. She was kind of led what would be considered, a gang of thieves, mostly cattle thieves. And she aided and abetted them. I have a poem called, Aiding and Abetting. So there's the question of, what role did she have, in that kind of moment of transition and theft and genocide. And she was also a woman who was running from the domesticity cage. She essentially, from what the records reveal, left a life of privilege in Missouri behind and rode into this territory in which she could, in some ways, reinvent herself, which was a privilege by any standard in terms of its relative moment. So I wanted to ask, what is authenticity in this continuum, and what do we need to break, and what do we need to settle into and kind of solidify in order to have these true and real experiences of life? And then when needs change, how do we change with them without losing that story we tell ourselves about ourselves? There's so many ways that we tell ourselves stories, and they kind of can keep us both steady and rooted, but then also in some ways imprisoned and stymied. And so I wanted to get to some of that, that understory for Belle, and ask, more deeply about viewing land as a cage, marriage as something that, she perhaps could use as utility, because there was utility in that. But the records also reveal that she had more than 6 husbands, and some of them were quote unquote outlaw weddings. But so she was a woman who loved love. She loved hard men. She loved men who were, quote unquote, engaging in criminality. And she often was, leading the charge in terms of that aiding and abetting part of the story. So land is a kind of its own character. Plus, as you were talking about, the roughness of the actual experience of land, as well as the kind of toll that it would take on the body, is something that I wanted to immerse readers in with that sensorial kind of whiplash.
Um, yeah, I am thinking about authenticity. That sparks a lot for me. Also, I just want to say I love the idea of an outlaw wedding. I want one of those, even though I'm married. Maybe I could just, does that just mean that you just decide you're going to get married and there's no like official, cool. Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, I wanted to say about authenticity that something about Comfort magazine, which was the source of the title of my book, as well as a lot of the found language. The way that I came to this source material is that I did a residency in Nebraska at a place called Art Farm. And it's run by this guy who grew up on the farm when it was actually a farm. And he turned it into an artist residency after the family kind of turned it over to him. And he chose not to farm, he chose to host artists there. And the farmhouse that he grew up in had this attic that he let me root around in. It had decades worth of stuff. And while I was there, he just kind of let me go up there. And I found this stack of a magazine called Comfort, many, many issues, mostly from the teens and the teens and 20s, the 19 teens and 20s. And Comfort magazine, which I would later find out was kind of a multi-level marketing vehicle for selling snake oil, which is something else that comes up in Bandit Queen, because snake oil is just everywhere. I do want to say that I recently learned that snake oil actually does have healing properties, a certain kind of actual snake oil. But as far as like an oil that comes from snakes, but there were many other types of patent medicines and things like that that were total BS. And Comfort was designed to sell this snake oil called Oxyan, which was called a food for the nerves, which is also like a very gendered, I mean, that's basically like a hysteria treatment, for women. And so it was sort of a Tupperware party thing where you would get people to kind of sign up and buy more issues of Comfort and subscribe to the magazine and get people to subscribe as a way to kind of do this thing. So and a lot of the found text comes from advertisements, some of which were for things that were really useful for women, and some of which were total crap and a waste of money. But that was where a lot of that stuff, a lot of the language came in. And I think that the way that I really came to be attracted to this text, and this segs into a question I want to ask you about your relationship to this research. At the time when I was at this residency and later working on the book, I was very confused and conflicted about the idea of getting married and having babies, which note, as my baby just makes a noise in the background. I do have a baby and I am married legally. But at the time I was really attracted to these texts that seemed to be pushing me to think about like my worst fears about what it would be like to settle down. And I just sort of realized that in retrospect, like the idea of settlement and settling. And something about this book was like working through these fears and these trepidations about what it would mean to lead a more domestic existence than I was leading. And I wanted to ask you about the parts of your book in which Margot Douaihy actually shows up by name. Because while in my book, there's like my story that I just told about my relationship to it is not at all obvious in the book, I don't think. But for you, there's some suggestion of like, there's a few poems where it feels like we actually fully enter the present day, and the writer or the speaker or the speaker sort of crops up and says, "Hi, I'm here, and I'm like having a relationship to Belle Starr." And I'm curious about how that came to be and what that means to you.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I love how your exploration took you through the channels of questioning and those notions of what does the idea of settling even mean for a person, and how context can change that in different times one is living in. And I thought of those very same questions in a lot of ways, which is what inspired me to break the fourth wall and just shake the structures, which in some ways, I think are vestiges of the past, kind of an aesthetic dominance or normalcy that the speaker is absent. Of course, even poems that have the word I in them and center a kind of interior ecology or experience of the internal still blend that space of what am I exploring versus what is the poet's biography or the subject's biography. So I just wanted to break that fourth wall and play. This book is so much of it centers experimentation, and it centers that, again, that kind of just feral lit match experience of knowing. So there are these sometimes epistemological forms, and then the poem like Voila, which is, I say my own name, just to kind of grab the reader by the collar and just, really keep them close with me the way that I was gripped and kind of held very tightly by Belle Starr, in things that I've read about her, some of her own reported speech and found speech in various publications, and the way she came alive inside of me. So much of what we do, has intellectual rigor, and we're pushing boundaries, and we're making discoveries and synthesis. And there's also just this raw fun of, and perhaps, arguably schizophrenia of like talking to somebody who's literally not there. You know, this woman died in 1889, and I'm having these conversations, with her and trying to inhabit her space in a poem like Seance. So imagining when seance parlors first came onto the scene in that area of the continent, and her walking into it to a smoke and mirrors ruse, but that strong desire still to connect with the beloved. And it's something that I have a lot of intimate experience with. So inhabiting her, inhabiting this space of someone looking to channel someone through a seance. So I thought in a few of the poems, let's break the wall, kick the wall down, and see how it lands. I tend to overwrite and then scale back and edit down and shake things. If it's dead wood or live wood, the live wood stays, the dead wood goes or gets burned, and it's all part of the process. So I just really wanted to kind of bring the reader into that strange dance that I was having with Belle, so that it's almost this sort of triangle where the reader is, fundamentally kind of kept on a state of either alert or surprise or delight or horror, whatever it might be. So that's why I've never done that before. It was totally brand new to kind of bring myself into the piece. And I think our editors were interested in that. And it's just one of those moments where you're really in a space of molding the clay and totally uninhibited and kind of free, where I like to be in the creation and ideation stage. And just ask, if you can kind of close your eyes and just sort of heat map it. And if it's like it beeps, there's something to it. There's something vital there. And ultimately, just for folks that if you're not too familiar with what the actual definition of documentary poetry is, I thought I could just read to you what the definition is according to the Chicago School of Poetics. Documentary poetry examines pre-existing cultural documents such as newspapers, family documents, advertising, archival material, and public testimony to produce poetry that intervenes in the textual construction of reality by merging the social with the personal. So that, it asked me to kind of think almost in those 3D terms of what can I shake it loose and think in new ways or reimagine Belle? So that was just really an interesting way to do that.
Yes, I have an infinite interest in writers and artists like injecting themselves into the work. I feel like I'm always down to be like, whoa, fourth wall is broken. And you do it very well. So yes, I feel like time is running down, and we're gonna move into our second set of readings here. So I'm going to read some work from later in the book, the middle and the end, toward the end of Comfort. And then Margot's going to close us out. Our clan wants for nothing but a bowl that's not broken, a whole one to sup from. Solder me, let me be an insect on your inner thigh, drop leafed. A day mote spinning in sunlight by the door jamb. And tell me the west and east signs of my truly being here, stretched taut across consecutive fields. Look down, daughter, a voice. It's a maze in your navel, come up in place of cord. Is running a small piece of sand soap through the grinder, is dipping brooms in hot suds, is tying a cord around a glass stopper, is ending prairie dogs, gophers, groundhogs, weasels, squirrels, crows, and hawks for good, is not dying in the house and smelling, is doing it outside in the breeze, is waiting for the barn to go up, hold front as face, embossed with botanicals, a question mark thinly entered, a fence, all map lines implying fence, is banks of snow that stayed white, nothing to stain them, is holding the child's hand as if birth in reverse, is the highest window, the one from which no face peered, is fallen, the hat slipped off, the naked curls on the ground, is false blue snakeskin or its tint, is a pond filled with other people, is turning around at the sound of her name. Is lining the interior with unbleached muslin, is tacking a line of pockets inside, is freshening feather pillows without wringing, they are exactly right, is treating chapped hands with a thick salve of lard and flour applied at night, is confusing brining with burning, was afraid the dog had been killed, but toward morning he was heard scratching at the door. A halo of silt in the sink, watered silk in the attic, the need to wax, the cylinder itself, is mottled, is beetles killed with dish soap diluted, is skirting the melting snow that clings to the house sides as if cold lived there alone, is wall studs, either mold or a spirit collecting, is what is the meaning of ownership, full or nothing at all, is staying because sometimes a body doesn't know when to stop. They say she raised peacocks and grapes against all advice. Women inherit the worst slices of property, abandoned graveyard, only 2 arable acres, etc. I just kept pulling bones out of the ground, she said. She couldn't grow what she set out to, and her field was a thicket of corpses. Because crazy means less acreage. Wilderness cordoned, the worst part, the burial place, the old we don't want to know. As the government road widened, her property shrank into an overgrown triangle. Is making a morning of wrong moves, is heather hung out to dry, is sleeping in the same room as the stove, is putting a wet finger to the wind, is wiping syrup from small but growing hands, is growing eyes in the back of her head, is the outer eye opening inner, up with the sun, hedge fence about the black cherries, is patterned planting, is the orchard quincunx, is stopping after the second form, coming home to be married, troweling a circle of sprouts from a heart-rotted oak, is accused of killing her own. All it is a way to cope. I reckon you, my partner, in dust. Ask after me all of your days. Always take a newborn baby upstairs before you take him downstairs. Otherwise, you'll incline him downwards for life. Tomorrows in jars lined up in the cellar. Everything moves sooner or later, even the fence. Margot.
That was a remarkable, the last line, even the fence. Beautiful, just really shattering and so resonant. And I love that kind of deep focus of some of your work. And it really sets the scene for this kind of unnerving attention to detail, which is just rippling with these discoveries. It's really beautiful. So I'm going to close out the readings portion, and then we'll say farewell in a moment or two with a poem called Blood and Velvet. Blood and Velvet. To live well is to love what leaves. The same surprise. The blackjack tree's wild crown, each leaf thick as the leather cover of a book too rare to open. The laughter of a redstart. The moon, distant as the inside of a marble. Why can't it stay longer? The electric storm, this prairie light, smoke in my hair from a good fire. Everything feels silken as I dance. Memories of you, the scent of your neck like cold water, sawdust, velvet. Your letters that hold me like barbed wire. The guns on my belt. Ever wonder why a hawk has no need for apologies, no choice but to take what she wants? One bird tears another bird apart, storm dune of blood and feathers. And in so doing, one creature's mouth against another's neck becomes a duet, the way a gun wears your hand as you fire it. And final poem for this evening, The Throat is the Song. Dusk, bliss of weightlessness. Crepuscular slice, where prairie meets sky. Slim hinge between this world and the next. All the people who have come before, all the people who will follow. No math can track it. But if you squint just right, everything fits. It is a puzzle, a miracle, how tide works, how time works. The air, sweet and dry as hay. The throat is the song. Where you feel no person is the person. Silence, its own way to listen. And if you tilt your ear just right, you can hear her. So thank you so much, everyone, for spending this time with us. Sarah, I just have enjoyed spending a couple of weeks with your glorious book, Comfort. And since we can't drop the chat information for our wonderful panelists or for our attendees who've spent this hour with us, I think it would be useful to just share where we can procure these remarkable books of poetry. So Comfort can be purchased from the fabulous Spuyten Duyvil Press at spuytenDuyvil.net. /comfort.html, but of surely following Sarah on the socials. So I have here for you at Heady Lines on Instagram and on Facebook. I believe you're there as well.
I'm on Facebook, but it's not Heady Lines there, but I'm sure it's all findable. It's all findable.
It's all findable. And of course, Bandit Queen, the Runaway Story of Belle Starr can be procured through Clemson University Press libraries. So that's libraries.clemson.edu/press. And you'll be able to find Bandit Queen really easily. And I would love to keep this conversation alive, this spirited material, the kind of questions that have no answers. They're sort of my favorites. So would love to stay in touch. I'm on Twitter at Margot, MARGOT DOUAIHY. And I'm also on Instagram at Neon Margot. So I am looking here. I don't think we have any open questions. I don't believe that function was opened for the webinar. So if you're writing them, we are not seeing them, apologies on that. Please ask us in different channels, in different rectangles, and keep that spirited discussion alive. So Sarah, would you like to say anything as we close out this reading and discussion?
Just that I'm really glad that you ended with the poem that you did end with, because that one really gave me chills. And I feel like it was that the place, or one place in the book, where you get this sense of like history as this really alive and deeply bizarre and weighty and creepy thing, which your book does such a good job of giving us an experience of, and just being like, this is what you can do with the archive. So it's been such a pleasure reading you and getting to know you, and doing this event. Thank you all for coming today. And thank you to Clemson University Press for hosting this.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Wonderful work. I'm a huge fan. I'm your new biggest fan. So thanks for the work you've done, and also contributing to the kind of living discipline of documentary poetry. So we'll stay in touch. Thank you all so much for your attention and your presence and your belief in the possibilities of art. So until next time.